December 10th, 2004, a Friday morning in Carmichael, a quiet suburb of Sacramento, California. The movers are coming later today. The house is empty, echoing with the silence of a life being packed away in cardboard boxes. Gary Webb, 49 years old, sits alone. He places a letter to his ex-wife, Susan, on the table. He places 3 other letters for his children beside it. On the front door, he has taped a note that simply says, "Please do not enter. Call 911 and ask for an ambulance." He is a man who has lost everything. His career is dead. His marriage is over. His bank account is empty. He has been humiliated, mocked, and exiled by the very profession he dedicated his life to. But he still has one thing left, a .38 caliber revolver. Gary lifts the weapon. He presses the cold steel against his cheek, and he pulls the trigger. The bullet tears through his face. It shatters teeth, rips through tissue, but incredibly, it misses the brain. He is bleeding, in agonizing pain, but he is still alive. Most men in that moment of supreme horror would drop the gun. They would scream for help. The survival instinct would override the despair. But Gary Webb does not drop the gun. With blood pouring from his face, dealing with shock and unimaginable pain, he steadies his hand. He cocks the revolver again. He places it against his temple, and he fires a second time. When the coroner arrived, he ruled it a suicide. 2 bullets to the head. It sounds like a punchline to a dark joke. It sounds like a mob hit. It sounds impossible. But for Gary Webb, the impossible was just another Tuesday. This was the man who had done the impossible 8 years earlier. He was the reporter who walked into the darkest corner of the American government, turned on the lights, and showed the world the cockroaches scattering across the floor. He proved that the Central Intelligence Agency was complicit in the drug trade that turned America's inner cities into war zones. He proved that while Nancy Reagan was on television telling children to just say no, her husband's government was shaking hands with the men saying yes. And for that act of courage, they destroyed him. Not with a bullet, that came later, but with ink. They killed his reputation first, so that by the time he pulled the trigger in 2004, he was already a ghost. But to understand why Gary Webb had to die, we have to go back. We have to understand what he found in a dusty stack of legal papers that terrified the most powerful people in Washington. The story begins not with a gun, but with a sandwich. It is July 1995. Gary is sitting at his desk at the San Jose Mercury News. He's a good reporter, tenacious, a bulldog, but he's not famous. He covers local corruption, government waste, standard beat reporting. His phone rings. It's a woman named Coral Baca. Now, journalists get calls from crazy people all the time. People who think the FBI is controlling their toaster or that aliens are living in their basement. Coral Baca sounds like one of them. She starts talking about the CIA, about cocaine, about a government conspiracy to sell drugs in Los Angeles. Gary listens, probably rolling his eyes, taking a bite of his lunch, waiting for a polite moment to hang up. But then she says something that stops him. She doesn't just have a theory, she has documents. She tells him that her boyfriend is sitting in jail for drug trafficking, but the man who supplied him, a Nicaraguan national named Danilo Blandon, is walking free. Why? Because Blandon is a government asset. Gary is skeptical, but he's curious enough to meet her. In a courthouse in San Francisco, Baca slides a manila envelope across the bench. Inside are grand jury transcripts. These are secret documents. People aren't supposed to see them. Gary opens the folder, and there, in black and white, is the testimony of Danilo Blandón. Under oath, facing federal prosecutors, Blandón admits it. He admits that he sold tons of cocaine in the United States. He admits the profits went to the FDN, the Fuerza Democrática Nicaragüense. You might know them better as the Contras. The Contras were a right-wing rebel army fighting to overthrow the socialist Sandinista government in Nicaragua. They were President Ronald Reagan's favorite freedom fighters. But Congress had cut off their funding. The Boland Amendment made it illegal for the U.S. government to send money to the Contras. So the CIA had a problem. They had an army to feed, a war to fight, but no money to pay for it. And here, in these transcripts, was the solution. Blandón testified that he sold cocaine in L.A. and the money went south. He testified that U.S. intelligence agencies knew about it. He testified that he was the conduit. Gary drives back to San Jose, his mind racing. If this is true, it changes American history. It means the crack epidemic, the plague that devastated Black America, that filled the prisons, that destroyed millions of families, wasn't just a social tragedy. It was a fundraising operation. Gary Webb decides to pull the thread. He has no idea that pulling this thread will bring the entire ceiling crashing down on his head. He starts digging into the two men at the heart of this dark alliance. On one side, you have the supplier, Danilo Blandón, a smooth-talking, college-educated Nicaraguan exile. He's the bridge to the CIA. On the other side, you have the distributor, Freeway Ricky Ross. Ricky Ross is a legend in the streets of Los Angeles. Before Ross, cocaine was a rich man's drug. It was for rock stars and Wall Street bankers. It was $50,000 a kilo. You couldn't sell that in South Central. But Ross was a visionary businessman. He discovered that by cooking the powder with baking soda and water, he could create small, smokable rocks, crack. Crack was cheap. You could sell a hit for $5. Suddenly, the market wasn't just the 1%, it was everyone. But to build an empire, Ross needed a supply, a massive, consistent, industrial-level supply of cocaine. And that is what Danilo Blandón provided. Gary discovers that Blandón wasn't selling Ross a few ounces here and there. He was selling him hundreds of kilos, truckloads, at discount prices. It was a match made in hell. Blandón had the CIA's protection to bring the drugs in. Ross had the network to push the drugs out. Gary flies to Nicaragua. He digs through court records in San Diego. He interviews former DEA agents who tell him, off the record, "Yeah, we knew. We tried to stop it, but every time we got close to the Contras, Washington told us to back off. National security." He finds a report from 1986, a decade earlier, where the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department raided Blandón's house. They found evidence of drug trafficking, money laundering, and connections to the Contras. But Blandón wasn't arrested. The evidence disappeared. The detectives were told to drop it. The picture is complete. It is horrifyingly simple. The U.S. government protected the wholesalers while declaring a war on drugs on the retailers and the addicts. They were arresting the black teenagers on the corner for selling $5 rocks while protecting the men bringing in the planes full of powder. August 1996. Gary Webb is ready. The San Jose Mercury News publishes Dark Alliance. It is a 3-part series, and it is explosive. But it wasn't just the text, it was the delivery. You have to remember, 1996 was the dawn of the internet news. Most newspapers just uploaded text. The Mercury News did something revolutionary. They put the documents online. They put the audio tapes of the depositions online. They invited the readers to check the evidence themselves. The graphic they used became iconic, a silhouette of a man smoking a crack pipe, superimposed over the official seal of the Central Intelligence Agency. The reaction was nuclear. The website crashed. People were forwarding the link to everyone they knew. In the pre-social media era, this was the most viral story in history. For Black America, this wasn't news. It was confirmation. For decades, people in Watts, in Compton, in Harlem had suspected that the sudden flood of drugs into their neighborhoods wasn't an accident. Now they had the receipts. Talk radio lit up. Congresswoman Maxine Waters demanded an investigation. The CIA headquarters in Langley was in panic mode. They had survived coups, wars, and scandals, but they had never faced an enemy like Gary Webb. Because Gary didn't use anonymous sources. He used names, dates, and court documents. CIA Director John Deutsch did something unprecedented. He flew to Los Angeles to hold a town hall meeting. He stood in a high school auditorium in Watts, surrounded by hundreds of angry citizens. He tried to deny it. He tried to say, "We don't traffic drugs." But the crowd shouted him down. "Liar! Murderer!" Gary Webb watched this on TV. He had done it. He had forced the shadow government into the light. He thought he had won. He thought the other major newspapers, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the LA Times, would jump on the story. He expected them to send their investigative teams to dig deeper, to find more evidence, to hold the government accountable. That is how journalism is supposed to work. But Gary Webb was naive. He didn't understand that he hadn't just exposed the CIA. He had humiliated the establishment media. Think about it. The Washington Post had the entire national security apparatus in their backyard. The LA Times covered Los Angeles. This was happening in their city, under their noses. And yet, a guy from a mid-size paper in San Jose scooped them all. They were jealous. They were embarrassed. And the CIA knew exactly how to exploit that vanity. The CIA didn't issue a formal denial. They didn't sue Gary Webb. Instead, they started whispering to their contacts at the big papers. "This Webb guy," they would say, "he's unstable. He's exaggerating. He's a conspiracy theorist." And the big three took the bait. 6 weeks after Dark Alliance was published, the counterattack began. The Washington Post ran a piece claiming there was no evidence the CIA targeted black communities. This was a classic straw man argument. Gary never claimed the CIA sat in a room and said, "Let's kill black people." He claimed they were willfully negligent. They knew the drugs were going there and didn't care because they needed the money. But the Post debunked a claim Gary never made. Then came the Los Angeles Times. This was personal for them. They assigned 17 reporters to the story. 17 reporters, not to investigate the CIA, not to find out if more drugs came in. No, they assigned 17 reporters to investigate Gary Webb. They tore his life apart. They scrutinized every sentence of his 20,000-word series. They found a few minor imprecisions, a date off here, a title wrong there, and they used those tiny cracks to shatter the whole foundation. They quoted anonymous intelligence officials saying Webb was wrong. Think about the irony. Webb used named sources and documents. The newspapers attacking him used anonymous CIA sources to say he was lying. And the public believed the big papers. The narrative shifted overnight. The story was no longer CIA sells drugs. The story became Gary Webb is a fraud. The pressure on the San Jose Mercury News was immense. Advertisers threatened to pull out. The editors, who had initially supported Gary, started to buckle. Jerry Cephas, the executive editor, got cold feet. He wanted to save his own reputation. In May 1997, Cephas published a column. It was titled The Dark Alliance, A Look Back. In it, he apologized. He didn't say the facts were wrong. He couldn't, because they were right. He apologized for the presentation. He apologized that the series implied things they couldn't prove. It was a betrayal of Shakespearean proportions. Gary's own boss threw him to the wolves to save face with the establishment. Gary was crushed. He yelled at his editors. He fought back. But it was over. The paper pulled him off the investigative beat. They transferred him to a small bureau in Cupertino, 150 miles from his home. It was a punishment, a message. Quit. His new assignment? Writing obituaries and reporting on police horses. Gary Webb, the man who shook the foundations of the U.S. government, was now writing about traffic accidents. He refused to give up. He wrote a book, also called Dark Alliance, laying out all the evidence in even greater detail. But the major newspapers refused to review it. The media blackout was total. He was radioactive. Eventually, unable to take the humiliation, he quit the Mercury News. He thought he could find work elsewhere. He was a Pulitzer Prize winner as a part of a team previously. He was a brilliant writer. But the doors were slammed shut. No major newspaper would hire him. The label discredited was tattooed on his forehead. The years passed. The stress destroyed his marriage. He lost his house. He ended up working for a weekly alt newspaper, engaging in local muckraking, but the fire was dimming. He felt erased. He would tell his friends, "I know I was right," and they would nod, but he could see the pity in their eyes. They thought he was obsessed. They thought he couldn't let it go. But here is the twist, the cruelest twist of all. He was right. In 1998, the CIA Inspector General, Frederick Hitz, released a classified report. It was forced by the uproar Gary had started. Volume 2 of the report was released quietly. In it, the CIA admitted that, yes, they knew about the Contras trafficking cocaine. They admitted that in 1982, the CIA had requested and received a waiver from the Department of Justice that legally allowed them not to report drug trafficking by their assets. Let that sink in. The CIA got a get-out-of-jail-free card for drug dealing. The report confirmed that they worked with over 50 Contras involved in the drug trade. It confirmed almost everything Gary Webb had written. But where were the headlines? Where were the apologies? There were none. The report was released on the same day the Monica Lewinsky scandal blew up. The media, happy to be distracted, ignored the CIA's confession. The New York Times buried the story on page A27. Gary saw the report. He saw his vindication printed in official government ink. But nobody cared. The world had moved on. The lie had traveled around the world while the truth was still putting on its shoes. By 2004, Gary was broken. He was unable to get a job in journalism. He was facing financial ruin. He felt that his life's work had been for nothing. Which brings us back to that Friday morning in December. 2 bullets. The conspiracy theorists will tell you he was assassinated, that a CIA hit squad came in, shot him 2 times, and staged it. It's a comforting thought, in a way. It makes Gary a martyr in a war. But the truth might be even darker. The police investigation showed that the first shot went through his cheek. It was a grievous wound, but not fatal. In his final moments, in blinding pain, Gary Webb had to summon a level of resolve that is terrifying to imagine. He had to decide for a second time to end it. Maybe he wasn't murdered by a hitman. Maybe he was murdered by isolation, by the crushing weight of knowing the truth in a world that preferred lies, by the betrayal of his colleagues, by the realization that being right isn't enough. Gary Webb died believing he was a failure. But today we know the truth. Dark Alliance is now studied in journalism schools, not as an example of bad reporting, but as an example of institutional failure by the mainstream media. The documents are there. The history books have been rewritten slowly, painfully, to include the footnotes he fought for. They killed the messenger, but they failed to kill the message. So the next time you read a headline, the next time the entire media establishment screams in unison to discredit someone, remember Gary Webb, the man who put a gun to his head because he refused to close his eyes. Remember that the truth often comes with a body count, and sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do in America is simply to tell it.